Hi, I am Christopher, and in today's episode, I'm uncovering the most horrifying last moments of tourists on safari. From a couple who left their tent unsecured in the dark, despite warnings to someone who stepped too close to the water's edge for the perfect shot and met a no-so-perfect end. But first, a woman who thought she understood the animal in front of her and paid for it instantly. It was the 17th of February, 2018, Nairobi, Kenya. A wildlife facility offering a controlled giraffe feeding experience from a raised platform. The platform kept visitors at head height while staying outside the giraffe's hind leg range. A step-down section on one end was used by staff for ground-level access. Olivia Wright was 41. She worked as a retail manager and ran her team the way she ran most things in her life, with confidence and the firm belief that experience was the same thing as expertise. She had fed giraffes before, 3 times, at different parks across 2 countries, and nothing had ever gone wrong. As far as she was concerned, that track record meant she understood how these animals behaved and what they were and were not capable of. 2 weeks before the Nairobi visit, she had been discharged from hospital after putting herself through an unregulated detox involving supplements and prolonged fasting that her body could not handle. 3 successful giraffe encounters, and she had decided she had the whole thing figured out. I think about that logic a lot. Nothing going wrong is not the same thing as understanding why nothing went wrong. She arrived at the facility with her daughter. The giraffe feeding experience was the main reason they had come. She had been looking forward to showing her daughter something she felt comfortable with. Her daughter stayed on the platform where visitors were told to stand. Olivia had brought her own food from home, granola and dried fruit, which the facility did not permit. Outside, food was prohibited for animal health reasons, and the rule was posted at the entrance alongside the other instructions. She had not mentioned it to staff, and they had not spotted it before she stepped down. She listened to the keeper's instructions before the session began, decided they were aimed at people who had never done this before, and stepped down through the open staff access section to ground level. The platform kept visitors positioned at the giraffe's head level and forward of its kick arc. Standing on the ground, placed her alongside and behind the giraffe's body, directly within the range of its hind legs. She did not know that distinction existed. The giraffe was an adult male that had been pacing and repeatedly repositioning throughout the session as the number of visitors and the frequency of feeding approaches increased around it. The keeper was standing several meters along the platform, managing other visitors at the same time. When he spotted Olivia on the ground, he called out for her to step back immediately. He could not reach her physically before she had already extended the food. She kept going anyway. She held a piece of granola out flat on her palm, arm extended, the way she had done at the other parks. The giraffe lowered its head and took the first piece without any aggression. Its movements were slow, and nothing about those first few seconds gave her any reason to stop. That calm confirmed everything she had already decided. She looked up at her daughter on the platform and smiled. She reached into the bag for a second piece and turned slightly toward her daughter as she did it. Her attention was no longer on the giraffe. She did not see the weight shift. The giraffe drove a rear leg outward in a single motion. There was no warning that registered to someone not actively watching for it. Giraffes kick fast, and they kick hard, and it was over before she could process that it had started. The kick struck her in the torso and lifted her off her feet. She landed hard on her side, and her head hit the ground on impact. She did not move after that. Staff reached her within seconds, and emergency services were contacted immediately. She died at the scene. The coroner recorded the cause of death as a combination of blunt force trauma to the torso and head, with findings consistent with multiple rib fractures, internal hemorrhage, and a fatal head impact sustained in the fall. Olivia's body was repatriated, and she was buried at home. Her daughter, who had been standing on the platform and witnessed what happened, was placed in the care of a relative following her mother's death. She had brought her daughter to show her something she felt confident about. Her daughter was on the platform watching when it happened. I do not have the words for that part of this story, and I am not going to try. The next case I want to cover started the same way. 2 people, a trip that meant everything, a rule that seemed small enough to bend, except this one happened in the dark. It was July 2017 at an unfenced bush camp in South Luangwa National Park, Zambia. The camp sat inside one of Africa's most active wildlife corridors, where animals moved freely through the grounds at night without barrier or restriction. Guests were told on arrival that tent zips had to be fully closed at all times. There were no exceptions to that rule. In the nights leading up to the incident, leopard activity had been recorded moving through the camp. Tom Bassett was 58, a retired postal worker who had saved for 3 years to make the trip possible. Irene Bassett was 55 and had planned every detail of it herself. The holiday was their 30th wedding anniversary and the first major trip they had taken together since their honeymoon. It had taken years of putting money aside, and it meant a great deal to both of them. 3 years of saving, 30 years of marriage, the first big trip since their honeymoon. I want you to hold that while you read what comes next. Tom attempted to fully close the tent zip before they settled in for the night. The zip kept catching on the inner lining and would not sit flush. After several attempts, he was still unable to get it to close cleanly. Irene told him to leave it. The opening was slight, she said, and the camp was lit, and other tents were nearby. It was not worth continuing to fight with it. Tom stopped trying. The tent was left slightly open along the zip seam where the closure had not sealed properly. They had returned to the tent earlier that evening with items from dinner, some of which introduced unfamiliar scent into the tent. I do not think Irene made a careless decision. I think she made a tired decision at the end of a long evening on a trip they had waited years for. Leopards are among the most capable and silent movers of any large predator. They are opportunistic and highly observant, and they investigate unfamiliar scents, movement, and accessible openings. They do not break through intact structures, but they will exploit and widen unsecured or weakened points of entry. The seam had not been fully closed. The fabric sat loose along the zip, leaving a visible point of access. From inside the tent, there had been small movements, shifting fabric, breathing, the kind of subtle disturbance that carries in still night air. The scent from inside the tent had been present since earlier that evening. The leopard approached and tested the opening at the seam, pushing against the loose fabric. The material shifted under pressure. The opening widened as the animal worked at it, enough for it to begin entering through the gap. The entry was not silent. There was movement in the fabric and a brief rasp of the zip under tension, enough disturbance to wake Tom, who was sleeping closest to the entrance. Tom woke to the movement at the zip and reacted toward it in the dark. The leopard was already entering, its head and shoulders pushing through the widened opening. The distance closed immediately. There was no space to retreat and nothing between him and the animal. The contact was immediate and focused on the head and neck. What followed was brief. The leopard seized Tom by the upper body and pulled. He was dragged partially through the widened zip seam, his legs still inside the tent. Irene woke to the sound and reached for him in the dark. She took hold of his arm and pulled back. In doing so, she came within range of the animal. The leopard struck at her once before releasing Tom and withdrawing into the darkness outside. Irene was left with deep lacerations to her left forearm and hand. Tom Bassett died at the tent entrance. The cause of death was recorded as catastrophic trauma to the head and neck consistent with a large predator attack. Irene was airlifted to a hospital in Lusaka, where she underwent surgery for her injuries. She survived. The sounds from inside the tent were heard by at least one guest in a neighboring tent, who described them as brief and then suddenly silent. Nobody understood what they had heard until morning. When the guide arrived at the tent at dawn for the morning check, he found Tom collapsed at the entrance, partially outside the tent. He called out, and Irene responded faintly from inside. The guide had 14 years of experience working in South Luangwa. He took leave immediately after that morning and did not return to the camp. Post-incident findings confirmed that the leopard had entered through the unsecured section of the zip seam and that the opening had widened under pressure from the animal. The point of entry was consistent with the partially open closure. Camp management reviewed the briefing protocols and reinforced the tent closure rule across all guest communications. The death was classified as a fatal wildlife intrusion resulting from an unsecured tent in an active leopard corridor. Irene Bassett returned to the United Kingdom 6 weeks after discharge. She had planned every detail of that trip herself. She came home alone. Tom and Irene Bassett saved for 3 years for that trip. They never made it home, but the next case I looked into involved someone who also had every reason to be careful and decided the rules were for people with less experience than him. It was the 14th of August 2018, Serengeti National Park, northern Tanzania, open savanna stretching flat in every direction. tall grass breaking the sightlines in patches across the plain. A guided walking safari with 6 participants. The guide had found fresh lion tracks that morning before the group set out. The walk had been shortened as a result, and the briefing before departure had been direct. Stay tight, stay quiet. Do not move ahead of the guide under any circumstances. Kevin Marsh was 34. He worked as a personal trainer in Birmingham and carried himself the way physically confident people sometimes do, like the rules of an environment were suggestions until proven otherwise. He had come to Tanzania with 5 friends for his birthday. The trip was 3 days in when the incident happened. On the first day, he had left the trail twice and interacted with wildlife on one occasion. The guide had corrected him both times. Kevin had acknowledged it and continued in much the same way. Fresh lion tracks that morning, a shortened route, a direct briefing, 2 corrections from the guide in the previous 2 days. I am not sure what signal Kevin was waiting for, but whatever it was, the Serengeti had already given him several. The group set out on the morning of day 3 in close formation. The guide led. The group stayed behind him. The grass on either side was tall enough to limit visibility beyond a few meters in places. Kevin walked in formation for the first stretch and then gradually became restless. He spoke quietly to the friend beside him. He had heard somewhere that lions did not typically go for groups, that the size and noise of a cluster of people was enough of a deterrent to make an attack unlikely. He applied that logic to himself and decided the risk was low. He drifted forward, separating from the group by roughly 20 to 25 meters, moving ahead of the guide into open ground. He was no longer part of the group. He was an individual moving alone through predator territory, with lions confirmed in the area and likely moving through the grass nearby. He did not know how close. He was looking out at the plain with his back to the guide when the guide caught a brief movement in the grass, low and directional, not consistent with wind. The guide shouted. Kevin turned toward the voice. He did not locate the threat before the lion broke from the grass. The charge covered the remaining ground in seconds. A lion in full charge across short distance does not leave time for a warning shot to function as a deterrent. The guide fired. The charge was already fully committed. The lion hit him from behind and took him to the ground. It seized the back of his neck and drove him down, maintaining the hold. He did not get up. The rest of the group was pulled back immediately. The guide moved toward Kevin as fast as it was safe to do so. Emergency services were contacted, and the park's emergency response was activated. Kevin Marsh was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 34 years old. The cause of death was traumatic injuries sustained during the lion attack. His friend brought his body home. He was buried in Birmingham. Post-incident findings confirmed that Kevin had separated from the group against direct instruction given that morning in response to confirmed lion activity in the area. No fault was identified with the guide or the operation. He had come to Tanzania with 5 friends for his birthday. Those friends brought him home. I do not know how you explain that flight back. I was not planning to include the next case in this video, but once I read it, I could not leave it out. A man at the Mara River during peak crocodile season, alone at the waterline, who looked up at the guide coming toward him and waved. It was the 28th of August, 2018, Masai Mara National Reserve, Kenya. The wildebeest migration was moving through its peak crossing season. Thousands of animals pushing across the Mara River, while crocodiles were present along the waterline, some partially visible, others not clearly distinguishable beneath the surface. The tour group was on an elevated bank with a clear sightline across the water. It was exactly the kind of scene James had come to document. James Carter was 38. He worked as a software engineer and had spent the better part of the previous year locked into a project cycle that had left him with almost no time for anything else. This trip was the break he had been promising himself. He had chosen the Mara specifically because of the migration crossing and had come prepared with camera equipment and a clear idea of the footage he wanted to bring back. He was the kind of person who approached things with precision and liked to get the result right. On the elevated bank, the angle felt too high and too distant for what he had in mind. I understand the instinct. He had planned this trip for a year, had specific footage in mind, and the angle from the designated spot was not what he wanted. But he didn't plan for what played out. He moved without telling anyone. While the group watched from the designated position, he slipped away and worked his way down to a lower point along the riverbank. 15 minutes passed before anyone noticed he was gone. The guide swept the area with binoculars and found him crouched low, camera extended, several meters below the group at the edge of the waterline. Crocodiles were present along the waterline in front of him, some partially visible, others not clearly distinguishable beneath the surface. He had been there a few minutes. Nothing had moved in that time. The stillness settled into something he read as safe enough. The water was calm. The light was good. He shifted his weight forward, bringing his legs closer to the waterline to improve the camera angle. The guide had already started making his way down the uneven slope and was shouting across the bank. James looked up, saw him, and waved. He held up a hand to signal he was fine and turned back to the camera. He did not move back from the edge. What James could not have known, and what the guide understood well, was that a Nile crocodile is capable of remaining motionless for hours and can cover several meters of ground in under a second when it commits to a lunge. The stillness was not a sign of disinterest. It was how they hunt. The guide was still picking his way down when the nearest crocodile moved. The nearest crocodile lunged from the shallows and seized him at the lower body before he had time to react or stand. The force knocked him forward and off balance. The crocodile dragged him toward the water. James went in at the edge. The grip did not release, and the force behind it was not something a person could pull against. By the time the guide reached the lower bank, James had already been pulled into the water and out of reach. He called emergency services immediately and remained at the bank, not entering the water until help arrived. Response to the location took time. When responders reached the scene, James Carter was confirmed dead. He was 38 years old. The coroner later recorded the cause of death as severe traumatic injuries, consistent with a crocodile attack. His camera was recovered from the scene. It contained no footage of the attack. He was laid to rest by his wife. His camera was recovered. It contained no footage of the attack. He had gone down there for a shot, and the camera caught none of it. I do not know why that detail lands the way it does, but it does every time I read it. If you think you have seen it all in this video, the last case I want to cover will change that, because unlike everyone before her, she did almost everything right. It was the 12th of March, 2019, at a field site in the Okavango Delta in northern Botswana. The area was a stretch of mixed woodland and savanna where hollow logs, termite mounds, and root systems dotted the landscape and provided natural cover for a wide range of animals. A reptile research program was running out of the site with a clear rule that applied to every member of the team: no probing or handling of any shelter site without clearance from the herpetologist. The rule was not a suggestion. Cheryl Daniels was 25, a registered nurse in advanced training from Atlanta, Georgia. She was medically experienced, fast-thinking, and used to making decisions under pressure without waiting to be told what to do. In a clinical setting, those qualities made her effective. In the field, they made her harder to slow down. She had grown up as an only child after her father died when she was 5, raised entirely by her mother, who had given up a great deal to make sure Cheryl got where she was going. Her mother had been at the airport to see her off before this trip, and Cheryl had every intention of coming home with something real to show for it, not just observation notes from a distance. Colleagues said she is the kind of person that doesn't like looking inexperienced. When a rule felt like it was designed for a different situation than the one she was actually in, she had a tendency to make that call herself rather than wait for someone else to make it for her. On the 6th day of fieldwork, Cheryl was assigned to document activity around termite mounds and hollow logs in her section of the site. The herpetologist was busy but reachable by radio. The rest of the team was spread out nearby. While moving through a stretch of acacia woodland, she noticed faint movement coming from inside a hollow log close to the ground. She stopped and watched it. She knew the protocol. She knew what she was supposed to do next. She did not reach for her radio. The radio was right there. The herpetologist was reachable. The protocol existed for exactly this situation. She knew all of it. She knelt down anyway. Earlier in the week, the team had seen monitor lizard activity in similar logs. The movement looked the same to her. The log was low. The opening was easy to reach, and the whole thing seemed like a straightforward check. She had removed her gloves while taking field notes a few minutes earlier and had not put them back on. She knelt down beside the log and pushed her bare hand several inches into the hollow without looking inside first. The log was occupied by a black mamba. Black mambas will typically attempt to escape when disturbed, but in a confined space with no room to retreat, a defensive strike becomes likely. The distance between the animal and her hand was near zero. A strike at that range carries a high probability of significant envenomation. Cheryl pulled her hand back the moment contact happened. She knew within seconds what it likely was. The pain was not the defining feature. The speed of what followed was. Onset was rapid, which indicated a heavy envenomation. Everything she did after that was right. She stayed as still as she could, kept her breathing steady, and radioed her team with her exact location and a clear description of what had happened. She did not run. She did not try to treat it herself. She sat on the ground and waited and kept herself as calm as a person in that situation can keep themselves. This is the part of Cheryl's story that I find hardest to read. The moment the strike happened, she did everything correctly. The progression moved faster than the response window allowed. Black mamba venom is neurotoxic, and it moves through the system quickly in cases of significant envenomation. Within the first 30 minutes, Cheryl's hands and arms were becoming weak. Her speech began to slur, and her breathing was already becoming shallow. Before the team reached her, her coordination was going. Her eyelids were heavy and difficult to hold open. Breathing, which she had been controlling deliberately, was becoming progressively harder to sustain. The anti-venom was 47 minutes from the site. The symptoms were progressing faster than that window allowed. The field kit on location had no bag valve mask, no oxygen supply, and no way to assist her breathing if it failed. There was no effective way on site to reverse or support the progression. When the team reached her, they kept her still and limited. Movement of the affected arm. Standard protocol for snakebite response in the field. The herpetologist was among the first to arrive at her position. Cheryl Daniels, 25, died from respiratory failure due to neurotoxic envenomation before the anti-venom reached the field site. The investigation confirmed Cheryl had approached the log without radioing the herpetologist, violating program protocol. Her gloves were found nearby, removed before the approach. The black mamba was identified and confirmed. Bite marks on her right hand were consistent with a close-range defensive strike. The death was classified as a fieldwork fatality, resulting from an unsanctioned animal interaction. Her body was returned to Atlanta. Her mother buried her surrounded by friends, colleagues, and family. The same people who had watched a quiet girl, raised by one parent, work her way across the world to do something that mattered to her. Her mother was at the airport to see her off. She came home in a way neither of them had imagined standing in that departure hall. I have covered a lot of cases in this series. This is the one that stayed with me the longest.